One of my subscribers, Jinn from Bangladesh, asked me to look at rings and perfumed oils. And my immediate reaction was one of trepidation. I think because both are associated with Jinn magic. I'm sure this wasn't behind Jiren's request, but the association for me was powerful, hence the trepidation. Let me be clear, whilst I don't want to encourage anyone, especially young people, to use Jinn magic, by the same token, it is not within my authority to condemn them. Indeed, whatever path we choose to Allah is highly personalised, and those who follow a left-handed path have a valid path. However, I was going to say fearful, I don't mean fearful, however sceptical I am of this path. I think that's because it's fraught with obstacles which take us back to the ego and the shadow of the material world. What are Jinn? Well, Jinn are mentioned in Al-Qu'ran and Hadiths. Therefore, there are some who say that non-belief means that somebody is not a true Muslim. But of course, this is based on a literal interpretation of Al-Qu'ran and Hadiths, an interpretation which I believe reflects their preoccupation with the temporal plane. For me, Al-Qu'ran and Hadiths are so profound that they should not be interpreted through our deification of Allah's shadow. Let me be clear, I do speak to Jinn and indeed interact with them in my work as a healer. But because I believe all, and I mean all, to be an illusion, including the temporal world, I also know them to be a construct of the mind. Because we are distorted by the temporal, they feel as real as everything else in the temporal world, and indeed they are. But ultimately everything is an illusion, a construct of our minds. Indeed, Jinn and all the darkness is a reflection of our own darkness. We all have this darkness, or if you like, the Jungian shadow self, as a result of being on a temporal plane and therefore removed from Allah and Allah's essence. But even if we've been blessed with Allah's light, we still have darkness. But we understand this darkness to be an absence of light or a failure to submit to Allah. Am I suggesting that all is internally created? Maybe. But maybe we are aware of energies from non-temporal planes. I have in the past called these dimensions that we cannot be expected to understand, let alone comprehend. When met with what we don't understand, our reaction is so often fear, and this fear can lead to hatred, even acts which some might call evil. This is the power of this darkness and by implication what we call Jinn. Indeed, some people report, and I myself have come close to this, being overcome with a sense of darkness and evil. We interpret this Jinn, but it's simply an energy from a non-temporal plane. However, if it helps to call this energy Jinn, then please do so, because I do myself. But do not extrapolate these feelings to become hatred and acts that approach evil. Running with the idea that Jinn are external, which is how I will address the rest of this vlog, as it's too abstract to talk in simply psychological terms, despite me ultimately seeing Jinn as exactly this. From my own experience, and this is as a healer, not as somebody that I believe uses Jinn magic, But I believe jinn to be very closely related to viruses. Indeed, they may even be a virus. This does not mean that they're external, although they could be, but simply an imbalance in the mind which creates a physical illness. Now, I've said it before, but man is preoccupied with hierarchies. No more so than within Islam. And jinn are seen as distinctly different from angels, even though some Sufis believe that they are one and the same. Certainly what is in our temporal plane we tend to describe as good and evil, and can be found in both jinn and angels, for they are simply charged with Allah's will, although the important distinction is that angels have no free will and cannot disobey Allah. Indeed, in Indonesia we have the concept of Hodam for good jinn. This is an important distinction because it means that jinn can move closer to Allah, which many Muslims believe that they can be Muslims. Even that during Ruqyah it's important to convert them to Islam. But this certainly is not my experience. What does seem to have resonance with my experience is that jinn are on a plane between man and angels. Some interpret this as them having the ability to pretend to be angels or humans, including humans that have passed, therefore ghosts, even to shapeshift. They're believed to inhabit trees, rocks, etc. But I believe this is simply a misinterpretation of the soul or consciousness that can be found in all of Allah's creation. And I'll speak about this more later. In my experience, they're all around us. And in some way, we are interacting with them. I also believe them to inhabit unclean places like toilets, graveyards, bars, betting shops, and perhaps controversially, banks. This preoccupation with hierarchies leads to a belief that there are hierarchies within the world of jinn. I'm not enamoured with such hierarchies, as you know, and therefore don't propose to dwell on them. But there are believed to be jinn kings and jinn armies, etc. Their organisation and activities are also believed to mirror those of man. Let me return to my view that there is an energy from another plane or dimension, if you want to call it. You will understand my scepticism about such fantasies. However, if this interests you, I can recommend a fellow British convert, he'd call himself a revert, called Sheikh Mohammed Tim Humble. Now, he was educated in Saudi Arabia, so you'll appreciate that I have little in common with him. I mean, to be honest, when he starts speaking, I have everything in common with him. And then he sort of goes off at a complete tangent to my own thinking and beliefs. Nevertheless, I do believe him to be a good man. And if this is of interest to you, then he's very detailed on this subject. Before I address the main parts of my vlog, let me be clear that I do not outright condemn jinn magic, something that I've said in my introduction. It's a technology that can be used for good or bad. Our definition of good or bad is very personal, but I see greed and control as bad. But for me, this applies to all technologies. So in other words, science, education, business, all can be used for politics, all can be used for good or evil. What I am much more concerned about is the abuse of these energies, or entities if you want to call them that, from other planes. Something again that I will address later. Furthermore, such activities can be dangerous. This is because they imply a contract with these entities. This contract can be the basis of what some call karma, be it good or bad, a karma that can persist for 7 generations. This leads me to the concept of jinn marriage. I believe this to be a metaphor for inviting a jinn to possess you. A very dangerous activity, but one which is central to the religious beliefs of the tantric path. So even this I refuse to condemn outright, but it's clearly massively dangerous. Before going into the detail, the main body of this vlog, it's a hell of an introduction, isn't it? I need to address magic using natural objects. There are at least 2 interrelated traditions to this practice. The first comes from an animistic perspective, and that is that all of creation has a consciousness or a soul. So this soul or consciousness can theoretically be petitioned to do man's bidding. Now this is a description that I somewhat recoil from, because I do not believe that we should seek to control, particularly not nature. Furthermore, that nature or a lamb seeks balance. So we really should work in harmony with nature and not against it. Islam does build on this concept. All of Allah's cosmos is seen as being imprinted with his essence, maybe even to contain the whole cosmos, albeit at a lower resolution. Some Muslims, and certainly other faiths, believe that natural objects and animals are recycled souls from the mistakes they have made in previous life, or to learn from the mistakes they have made in a previous life. As the angels, and some would argue also jinn, are engaged in ensuring balance within this cosmos, then when using these objects we are working with angels and or jinn. Let me reiterate that this is what many would call karma. So clearly rocks, stones, and by implication rings containing stones are believed to contain an energy, whether we call it a soul, consciousness, an angel, or a jinn. Now whilst essential oils will contain the energy, call it what you will, of what they are created from. Now normally this would be from a plant, but it could be a rock or an animal. However, man-made fragrances, especially those containing alcohol, are much less likely to contain this energy. Early Islam had a tradition of scenting masjids or mosques. Records suggest that a paste was made from saffron, and this was commonly used. In addition, musk oil was burnt in lamps. Pilgrims on Hajj and Umrah would be familiar with these scents, although some scholars claim that scenting the Kaaba was not common until the Umayyad caliphate. This led to a tradition of scents on the body, especially during Ramadan. Certainly by the time of the Abbasid caliphate, the Kaaba was perfumed with musk and ambergris. The sale of scents at Mecca and other holy sites began to develop as a tradition. Certainly by the 7th century, these became gifts for pilgrims to take back to their families on completion of Hajj. This corresponded with the taking of relics such as soil from the graves of saints and sunan, often mixed with these scents, which were believed to have strong healing properties. Such practices appear to mirror Christian traditions of burning incense and sale of saintly relics. Along within Islam, the use of scents was said to evoke heaven, which is seen as a garden. In fact, Islam played a major role in bringing scents to the West via Andalusia, and Al-Kindi wrote a book of the chemistry of perfume and distillations, whilst Ibn Sina invented the method for extracting oils through distillation. It would seem that early on most scents had been imported from India, and these included musk or kasturi, ambergris, saffron, camphor, and agarwood or gold or gaharu. From these traditions developed the tradition of using scents when visiting the masjid. And inexpensive rolls of scents are still often to be found for sale outside masjids. Indeed, it's seen as an essential part of wudu, the ablutions, the ritual cleaning that all Muslims do before praying. And the wearing of scent is therefore associated with cleanliness. Now, whilst the explanation I've given for the popularity of scents amongst Muslims is factually and historically correct, it's going to be a red rag for a bull for that minority of Muslims who love to shout the loudest. And they will, needless to say, claim a justification for the use of scents from Al-Qu'ran and Hadiths. It's said that the Prophet Muhammad was said to favour musk. Now, this is a substance with a strong odour obtained from the gland of a musk deer. And it's normally believed that he mixed this with ambergris, a grey amber which is solid, waxy, inflammable substance. Oh, it could be blackish colour. And it's produced in the digestive system of sperm whales. Although this is often confused with amber, which is a fossilised tree resin. There is a hadith which states that the Prophet was fond of Indian agarwood or oud, and this scent comes from the fungal infection found on many trees, rather than a particular type of tree itself. It'll also come as no surprise that the use of alcohol-based scents is widely debated within Islam. The majority of scents used are oil extracts known as attar. However, alcohol does diffuse the odours, allowing for more complex fragrances. Personally, I would never use an alcohol-based scent for prayers. Furthermore, most Western scents use synthetic fragrances. So for those of us believing scents to have some mystical properties, they would almost certainly be lost. Nevertheless, most attar are not a single essential oil, but a mix of 2 or 3 base essential oils. The use of incense is common in the Middle East, including in homes. This is normally a bakor, burnt over charcoal in an incense burner. The Prophet himself is said to have favoured an oud-based incense, and this was sometimes mixed with another wood such as camphor. The use of incenses is recommended within 1 hour of sunrise, and a different incense is associated with each day. So for Sundays, sadarak or sadarach is recommended, and this is a resin obtained from a small cypress-like tree. On Monday, Java pepper is used, and as the name suggests, it's mostly grown in Java but also Sumatra. Or you can use musk, kasturi. Tuesday, sandalwood or cendana, which is a class of wood from trees in the genus Santalum. Wednesday, benzoin or Comenian, a balsamic resin obtained from the bark of several species of trees in the genus Styrax. Thursday you can use benzoin again, or mastic, a resin obtained from the mastic tree. It's also known as the tears of Chios, being traditionally produced on the island of Chios. Unlike other natural resins, it's produced in tears or droplets. And Friday is for cloves or chenka, the aromatic buds of a tree, whereas Saturday is for amber, or indeed ambergris. Now, no explanation of magic would be complete without mentioning Solomon, or Suleiman, because Solomon's one of the most important figures in the Western magical tradition. But Suleiman is widely looked to or quoted within the Islamic tradition of sorcery. The Lesser Keys of Solomon is an anonymous grimoire on demonology, which really is the foundation of the Western ceremonial magic tradition. It was compiled in the mid-17th century, mostly from materials of a couple of centuries older. It's normally compiled from 5 books: the Ars Goetia, the Ars Theurgia Goetia, the Ars Paulina, the Ars Almadel, and the Ars Notoria. The names of 72 demons are found in the Ars Goetia. Maybe I should say spirits, because some are believed to be good. The Western tradition claims that these demons don't like strong smells, and the magician should therefore be clean and preferably not having eaten fish or garlic, as though, as I say, this is somewhat disputed in the Islamic and certainly in the Indonesian tradition. Al-Qu'ran claims that the winds were made subservient to Solomon, and he could control them at his own will, and that the Jinn also came under Solomon's control, strengthening his reign. Unlike the Talmudic tradition, Solomon was unaware and never participated in idolatry. Furthermore, the Al-Qu'ran rejects that Solomon was a sorcerer. Solomon did not disbelieve, but the Jinn disbelieved, teaching men magic. And that's Surah 2:102. Whilst before summoning Jinn, it's normal for magicians to take wudu, that's the ablutions or ritual cleansing. The Islamic tradition suggests that Jinn do like strong smells, and different Jinn are attracted to different smells. Some even maybe to foul smells. At this point, I need to add that in the Middle East, Jinn is a term used for all paranormal entities, maybe including aliens. Whereas in Indonesia, we're a little more specific, identifying ghosts as different entities. Muslims from the Middle East will argue that ghosts are simply Jinn pretending to be the dead. A proposition which seems ridiculous, based on my personal experience. As I say, Islamic magicians tend to believe that individual entities are attracted to specific smells. So even though scents believed to be from Al-Qu'ran or a Hadith might attract Jinn or ghosts, certainly in my experience, frankincense in particular often attracts Jinn. Nevertheless, there is a tradition of producing scents to be used in the invocation of Jinn within the Muslim world. I believe many to originate in Turkey, although those sold in Indonesia will probably be local copies. So I hypothesise that these do have Ottoman origins. A common scent used for invocation comes in the form of ampules known as needles. The ampule making the release of the scent easy at the correct time in a ritual. Another very common form is an apple gin. This can either contain an aromatic oil or a bakhor. And when I worked in Saudi Arabia in the 1980s, I recall being shown an apple gin on display in an office in Riyadh. Of course, this was well before the formation of the anti-witchcraft unit in 2008. In Indonesia, we use essential oils, either via aromatherapy or in massage, and we use them for many purposes, many of which are outside the remit of this vlog. But it's worth mentioning that I do use bidara oil, lot or sidra, for jinn removal. I also rub a warming oil, such as gandapura, on my feet or a back if I can feel those telltale signs of needle-like, like needles sticking in my back or my feet, which is a telltale sign of paranormal attack. In common with the Muslim tradition to take in the soil of Saint Sunan from graves, this is sold in Indonesia. And in the case of the illustration, it also includes a wafak to be dissolved in water and drunk. Clearly this is believed to have health benefits, but especially, again, for the removal of jinn. Bulu Perindu is believed, I believe is the same as moving serpent seed from the Western magical tradition, and it's a very common love spell known as a pellet. The seed or grass is commonly placed in an oil which can be worn as a perfume, and many Indonesian teenagers use this. Manigarja literally means elephant sperm, pardon me, and is used as a love spell. I'm pretty certain that none on sale is actually real elephant sperm. Whilst Misik Hitam is supposedly a very powerful oil used in rituals to invoke jinn. Let me reiterate, there are two important factors to remember about Indonesia. Firstly, that we do not call all spirits jinn, and secondly, that we believe spirits to like strong smells. I need to add to this that we believe that we must lose any attachments or addictions when we die, or we will take these cravings with us to the grave, seeking to feed these addictions from the living. Because so many spirits have been addicted to cigarettes, they're commonly used in invocation. Indeed, all brands of cigarettes fetch very high prices. I've witnessed non-smoking dukun chain smoking during invocation, presumably because the spirits they invoke were addicted. Coffee was less commonly drunk than tea in the past, but more associated with addiction, and therefore is sometimes also used for invocation. But maybe the most commonly used invocation aroma is that of opium. Dutch colonists had a monopoly over the import of opium from the British East Indies and quickly got Javanese labourers addicted. Non-psychoactive opium is widely available in Indonesia for invocation of spirits. These tend to be branded as they would have been in the past, including references to their supposed place of origin. Of course, such aromas come in a variety of forms, including essential oils that the dukun will wear or infuse, and dupa or incense, which they will burn. These are commonly in the form of bakhor, but joss sticks and small incense pyramids may also be used. Turning to actual perfumes, these are also used in invoking, especially of ghosts. There are a number of sweet-smelling perfumes that often are used by both men and women. As perfumes, but they're also used to reduce the smell of a corpse upon death. So these are seen as useful in invoking ghosts. There will be a variety of local brands across Java, but popular brands include Shirimpi, which is the name of a specific dance and dancers from the Kraton in Jogja, and Matadoyong, Mermaid's Tears. But rosewater is also commonly used. Finally, there is a Bakor type of incense known as Gondumayit, literally the smell of death, which needs no explanation. You may well be questioning the effectiveness of these various aromas from Indonesia, art evocation, especially if you're a magician of the Western tradition. Unfortunately, I can't give a direct answer as I'm not a practicing magician, simply a healer and a mystic. But the tradition in Indonesia is that each spirit will have their individual preferences. And therefore, I guess it's more like chaos magic, a case of trial and error. True, there are a pantheon of spirits in Indonesia and particular rituals, and therefore a sense will be associated with each. But unlike Western ceremonial tradition, these are likely to differ markedly across Java, and therefore naturally across Indonesia the pantheon and rituals will change dramatically. In some parts of Indonesia, including on the island of Java, the magic will be much closer to Middle East and Islamic traditions, while other parts of Indonesia, the tantric and also animistic traditions, will be much more important.